What can we learn from reflecting on Metamorphosis, or the Golden Ass of Apuleius? In this ancient Latin novel, Lucius attempts, through magic, to turn himself into a bird, but instead turns himself into a donkey. In the final chapter, with the help of the Egyptian god Isis, he returns to his human form. What can we learn about the ancient world from this novel? And was this inspiration for the modern story about Pinocchio, the puppet who is also turned into a donkey? Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare. The wildly popular and only Latin novel that has survived intact to the modern age was Metamorphosis, most commonly known as The Golden Ass. And it was written by Apuleius, who was born in the year 125 AD in Roman North Africa, not far from the future birthplace of St. Augustine. The Golden Ass was quite popular both in the ancient world and in the Middle Ages. It was quite risque, quite ribald, with many stories within stories, with a few moral lessons sprinkled in here and there. We are reflecting on this book because of its influence on much later literature, including many ancient works, and later the plays of Shakespeare, and the original Pinocchio, and perhaps the famous short story by Kafka, also named Metamorphosis, where an unfortunate young man wakes up one night to discover he has mysteriously been transformed into a giant beetle. And the basic plot of our book is our young man Lucius spies a witch who has learned how to transform herself into various types of birds. When she is gone, she tries out the same portions, but his girlfriend grabs the wrong flask. He's turned into a donkey, not a talking donkey, but a braying donkey who has kept his human intelligence and human tastes. There are scattered penitential regrets, but mostly our donkey is able to spy on the crimes and indiscretions of both robbers and cheating lovers to provide the reader with many titillating tales. In the final chapter, the goddess Isis appears to him in a dream, telling him what he needs to do to be transformed back into a human. And the Golden Ass also gives us a peek into the ordinary lives in the ancient world. Magic was just as real to many in the ancient world as UFOs are to many in the modern world. Also, life was grinding and relentlessly cruel to those who toiled on farms and as craftsmen, and both travelers and villagers feared the bandits and brigands who infested the countryside. St. Augustine, in his book, The City of God, mentions both the role of magic and the Golden Ass. He said that when he traveled in Italy, he heard of magical metamorphoses in one district in that country, saying, landladies conversant with these evil arts were in the habit of giving drugs and cheese to travelers. So their guests were turned into pack animals on the spot and were used to carry commodities of all kinds. Afterwards, when they had finished their jobs, they were restored to their original selves. Yet their minds did not become animal, but were kept rational and human, just as in the Golden Ass by Apuleius. And surprising to us, St. Augustine then simply states that this may be either fact or fiction. St. Augustine states that stories of this kind are either untrue or at least so extraordinary that we're justified in doubting them. Although God can do anything he pleases, demons can only do that which God permits, and God's judgments are often inscrutable but never unjust. Demons, of course, do not create real entities, and if they do indeed perform deeds of metamorphosis, they only appear transformed beings created by the true God, to make them seem what they are not. And this illustrates that in the ancient world, many people really did think that magic was real. Lucius finds lodging in the house of the miserly Milos, who is so fearful of robbers that he refuses to buy chairs and tableware. He is warned by his aunt that Milos is married to Pamphili, a seducing, dangerous witch. But Lucius insists on returning to his lodging, thinking to himself, make a beeline for their maidservant Fotis. She is attractive, she has amusing ways, and she is quite sharp. Last night when you retired to sleep, she genially escorted you to your room, fussed over you, tucked you in quite affectionately, kissed your forehead, and showed by her face her unwillingness to leave. In fact, she kept halting and looking back. When our traveler arrives back at his lodging, he finds a maidservant stirring dinner in a pot. Lucius remarks, my dear Fotis, how lusciously and attractively you wiggle that wee pot, and your bottom with it. How lucky a fellow would be if you let him stick his finger in, he'd be on top of the world. And Fotis replies, keep clear, poor boys. Keep clear as far as possible from this stove of mine. If once my little flame shoots out and as much as sears you, you will be all ablaze inside. and I'll be the only one who can put your fire out. The spices I stir in are sweet, and I'm an expert at pleasurably shaking a bed as a pot. Now, gentle reader, we can learn that perhaps this early Latin novel has survived because it is also a romance novel, and this romance does last for a dozen risque and ribald pages. But Lucius's curiosity about witchcraft ends it abruptly. Indeed, those in the ancient world know how dangerous magic could be, and the Old Testament has many prohibitions against magic. We read in Exodus, "You shall not permit a sorceress to live," and in Leviticus, "You shall not practice augury or witchcraft." And after the long string of awful, "Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of distant and near relatives" in Leviticus. "A man or a woman who is a medium or a wizard shall be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood shall be upon them." And in Deuteronomy, "There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering. Anyone who practices divination, a soothsayer or an augur, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a wizard, or a necromancer." Man, I tell you, Deuteronomy does not like magic. So how does Lucius grow long ears, hooves, and a tail? The golden ass could be associating magic with illicit intimacy, or it could be simply telling us that both dominated the ancient imagination. But Lucius does not fear magic. He begs Fotis to allow him to spy on her mistress as she changes her form, and Fotis relents, as they spy on her through some cracks in the walls. The witch Pamphili first divested herself of all her clothing. Then she opened a small casket and took from it several boxes. She removed the lid from one small box and extracted the ointment from it, smearing it all over herself from the tips of her toes to the crown of her head. Then she next held a long and private conversation with the lamp, and proceeded to flap her arms and legs with a trembling motion. As she gently moved them up and down, soft feathers began to sprout and sturdy wings began to grow. Her nose became curved and hard, and her nails became talons. In this way, Pamphili became an owl. She uttered a plaintive squawk as she tried out her new identity as she flew out the window. Now Lucius views this, finds that it is not that difficult, and then begs Fotis to borrow the magic potion so that he too can fly above the ground as a bird. So she takes a box out of the small casket, and Lucius likewise strips and rubs the ointment all over his body. And Lucius remembers. I then flap my arms up and down, imitating the movements of a bird. But no down and no sign of feathers appeared. Instead, the hair on my body was becoming coarse bristles, and my tender skin was hardening into hide. There were no longer 5 fingers at the extremities of my hand, for each were compressed into one hoof. From the base of my spine protruded an enormous tail. My face became misshapen, my mouth widened, my nostrils flared open, my lips became pendulous, and my ears huge and gristly. And get this. The sole consolation I could see in this wretched transformation was the swelling of my penis, although now I could not embrace Fotis. Now Lucius was distraught, but he could only pout and bray, he could not talk. Fotis was distraught. Fotis had picked the wrong box. But no fear, all Lucius needed to do was return to human form was to eat some roses. So Fotis led him to the stable. She would venture outside the next morning to find her little donkey some roses to chew. But in the middle of the night, they were interrupted by robbers. Robbers who discovered that Milo had so much loot that they also needed to steal Milo's donkeys and horse to help carry it off. One overarching theme is how randomly cruel life can be, especially in the ancient world. Our little donkey Lucius is terrified when his fellow ass collapses under the weight of his load and is unable to get up. Our author tells us. The robbers drew a sword, cut his hamstrings right through, dragged him a little way off the road, and then hurled him still breathing over the top of the cliff, headlong into the nearest valley below. As I reflected on the fate of my wretched comrade in arms, I decided to renounce guile and deceit and to show myself a good ass to my master, especially since he overheard that they were close to their hideout. Now we're going to skip over several stories within story. One of the most notable is a story about Psyche and Cupid. The robbers had kidnapped a bride at a wedding they interrupted, killing the groom. But in this tale, the robbers never raped their victims, which they probably would have done in real life. But once they reached their camp, after a meal and a sleep, the robbers go out to pillage some villages, leaving behind the hag who keeps her camp with the donkey and the girl. The hag, to distract her, tells her the long story of Psyche and Cupid, which makes up the middle of the novel. This is the story that C.S. Lewis retells in his book, Till We Have Faces. And the robbers return, load up our little poor donkey with loot, and drive him so hard he trips over rocks, causing him to injure his left legs and hoof. The robbers show no patience, asking, "How long are we to waste our time feeding this broken down ass now that he is lame as well?" And this frightens him, and after they arrive in camp and the robbers depart, our donkey tries to make a run for it. But the hag pulls on his halter, trying to hold him back. This commotion alerts the pretty hostage, and she jumps on his back, and they take off. As they flee, she strokes him and promises, saying, "What dishes I will serve up to you. First I shall lovingly comb this mane of yours, and adorn it with my childhood trinkets. In curling the hair on your brow, I shall part it neatly. Your tail, which is all matted up and spiky because no one has washed it, I shall spruce up and make it glossy." This encourages the donkey to gallop, but they're caught by the robbers. And when they return, they find the hag hanging from a tree. The robbers decide they cannot trust them. One robber exclaims, "The ass, which is always bone idle, eats us out of house and home, and now he pretends to be lame. But he took flight with the girl. You should accordingly decide to slit his throat tomorrow, and sew the girl naked inside his belly, since he would rather have her than us." But this plan is interrupted when the robbers elect a new leader of their gang. And the gang had lost several members in their raids, and they needed to build up their numbers, so they welcomed a new member into their gang. He impressed the gang when he cut open his jacket lining to contribute several thousand gold coins to the gang's treasury. He claimed to be Hamus the Thracian, leader of the gang that once terrorized all of Macedonia. He talked a good game, and they elected him as their leader. And our leader was not fond of killing the girl, he argued. Robbers with good sense should consider their own profit above all else, even revenge. If you sew the girl in the ass and finish her off, you will merely vent your own annoyance on her and gain no profit. My alternative proposal is that she should be taken to some town and sold there. A young girl like this will fetch quite a high price. I myself have a long acquaintance with some brothel keepers, and I imagine that one will be willing to pay many talents for this girl to be employed in a brothel, a suitable price for such a high birth. And this is a recurring theme in ancient literature, how women are often kidnapped or enslaved as concubines after their side loses a battle. And that's how they're compelled to make the best of their situation. For example, in Homer's Iliad, the Greeks and Trojans battle over Helen, who was abducted from Greece by Prince Paris of Troy. The Iliad itself is about a squabble between Greek kings over captured concubines. We even see this in the Odyssey, where Odysseus is compelled to be the sexual partner of several goddesses and witches. After some consideration, to the relief of the girl and our donkey, the robbers loosed the girl from her bonds. As soon as she had set eyes on that young man and heard mention of the brothel and its keeper, Cherit began to perk up and smile all over her face, and the donkey did not approve. My natural reaction was to criticize the whole sex when I observed this girl, who had pretended to be in love with her young suitor and to long for a chaste marriage, and she welcomed the prospect of a foul and filthy brothel. And the author tells us that at that moment, the whole female sex and its morals lay perilously poised on the judgment of an ass. The dinner wine that night was drugged, and when all the robbers were fast asleep, the new leader bound them up in chains, and in the morning he put the girl on the donkey's back and returned to the girl's hometown. Our donkey Lucius remembers what a parade was on view, men and women, young and old, in a truly unforgettable sight, the former bride riding in triumph on an ass. It was now the robber's turn to be run through with a sword and then rolled off the cliff. But Lucius was still a donkey, and he was put to work grinding grain, and his keepers abused him, and the stallions kicked him. Nobody is kind to an ass. But Lucius' sufferings are not going to last forever. Lucius the donkey was once again sold to a catamite priest, one of the meanest dregs of society. Those people who parade through the streets of town banging cymbals, shaking castanets, and carrying around the Greek goddess, soliciting alms. The auctioneer even said, "This is no ass, you see. He's gelded, compliant in any service. He doesn't bite or lash out. You could believe that in this ass's skin there lurks an unassuming human being." During their journeys, our donkey heard a curious story of a promiscuous wife whose poor husband came home unexpected. This clever woman freed the lover from her close embraces and carefully hid him in an empty corn jar half buried in a corner. Then she opened the door, greeting her husband sharply. "Why are you not attending to your usual work to ensure our livelihood while I work desperately day and night?" The husband then says he's found a buyer for their forever empty large corn jar who will pay 6 denarii. But then she announces that she's found somebody to buy for 7 denarii. And what is more, the buyer is right now inside the jar inspecting it. The lover then emerges, complaining that the jar is very old, has several cracks, and is quite dirty in spots. So the husband then climbs in the jar to inspect it and clean it. Lucius, our donkey, recalls the tale. That handsome lover boy laid the workman's wife face down over the jar, bent over her, and then had his way with her. Meanwhile, she thrust her hand into the jar, and with the wit of a lady of easy virtue, made a fool of her husband. With her finger she pointed out various places that needed cleaning, until the job was completed above and below. She took the 7 denarii, while the hapless workman had to put the jar on his shoulders and carry it to the adulterer's lodging. Lucius remembers, I myself now gratefully recall my existence as an ass, for when I was concealed in the ass's covering and was tried by various fortunes, I gained the knowledge of many things, although admittedly I was less wise. And that indeed morally is a very true statement. Sometimes knowledge harms you rather than helps you. But after Lucius was sold once again to a baker, he became a participant in exposing the lover of his cheating wife. When the husband went to a friend's house for dinner, the wife welcomed her young lover with a shower of kisses. But when he came home early, she had her lover hid behind a large wooden tub. She asked her husband why he came home so early, why he seemed so depressed. He replied, I just could not bear the disgraceful, outrageous behavior of that adulterous wife of his, so I cleared off. She just could not resist. She insisted that he tell her the whole story. His friend, the cuckolded husband, surprised his wife by coming home unexpectedly, so she hid her lover in a laundry wicker basket that unfortunately had clothes in it bleached with sulfur, which made him sneeze. Just at this moment, our dutiful donkey tells us that he was passing by the tub when he saw the tips of the adulterer's fingers. He stamped on them with his hoof, and the unbearable pain made the adulterer shout out in pain, throwing the bin aside. This revealed the character of that infamous woman. The husband then punished the boy and then separated from his wife. After that, the estranged woman got her revenge by arranging for the hanging death of her husband, and Lucius, our unfortunate ass, was sold several times again. And there's a pattern in these ribald stories. Murder often follows cheating. The prevalence of bandits and the violence in these stories may reflect the fact that in the provinces and countryside of much of the ancient world, there wasn't the law and order that we are so accustomed to today and that existed sometimes in the capital cities. The boondocks of the ancient world was more like the Wild Wild West. And fortunately, the last owner of our donkey is slightly less abusive. The last owner of Lucius, our donkey, was a prosperous baker and confectioner. Their 2 slaves, who were brothers, needed a donkey to carry their cuts of meat and baked goods to be sold at various markets. They were in the habit of preparing lavish meals with many leftovers left on the table. At first, our darling donkey would break into the house after everyone had gone to bed and snack of the leftovers. But each night he ate more and more, so much more that everyone was suspecting that the other was helping himself to too many seconds. What about our fasting donkey? He tells us, I was feasting on this generous fare and waxing fat on this abundance of human food. My body had now filled out to a generous plumpness. My hide had become juicily soft and greasy, and my coat had a handsome sheen, which was suspicious since the 2 brothers noticed that he had not touched his hay. The brothers spied on the dinner table, and they were astonished at the spectacle of an ass as a gourmet, and they split their sides with uncontrollable laughter. They told the master, who laid all manner of sweets and breadstuffs on the table, and our donkey not only ate that up, but he also drank sweet wine mixed with honey. They were amazed that they could even teach his donkey to recline at the table and wink to demand a refill of his drink, but Lucius pretended that he couldn't learn any other neat tricks so he would not become too suspicious. The word got around the village. People would say, that man keeps an ass as a companion and a guest at a table. The creature wrestles and dances and understands human language, and shows his feelings by motions of his head. Gentle reader, you will be distressed to know that one dysfunctional older lady even desired carnal relations with our donkey, even bribing the keeper of the stable at night. And when the master learned of these demented diversions, he decided to book his donkey for a public show, booking a lady of low repute with her own long backstory of deception, adultery, and abuse, which of course Lucius recounts at length. And the show at the theater begins with a stage constructed to resemble Mount Ida of Homer. And the show began with boys and girls in the first flower of blooming youth embarking on the Greek Pyrrhic dance. Many maidens and boys marched through in costumes representing the gods and goddesses of Greek and Roman mythology. Next came the goddess of love, Venus. Venus took center stage to great acclamations, smiling sweetly. She was surrounded by a throng of the happiest children. You would have sworn that these little boys, whose skins were smooth and milk white, were genuine cupids who had just flown in from sky or sea. They looked the part with their tiny wings, miniature arrows, and their gleaming torches as they lit the way as though she were en route to a wedding banquet. Venus, with her strange swinging of the hips, began to advance, her refined movements matching the soft sound of the flutes. Then the poor girl of lowly repute was brought in by a soldier, laying on the nuptial couch, stuffed with masses of feathers and adorned with a coverlet of silk. What did our dutiful donkey think about all this? Shame at the prospect of public copulation and disgust at being besmirched by this foul female criminal afflicted me, but I was in an agony of torment through fear of death. His keepers thought him tame and were distracted by the show. The donkey edged towards the gate, taking off at full gallop, covering 6 miles at top speed. Perhaps our donkey had read Exodus. Immediately following the verse condemning magic, we read, "Whoever lies with the beast shall be put to death." And there are prohibitions against this in Leviticus, and the topic has a Wikipedia page under zoophilia. After reaching the Aegean Sea, our distressed donkey remembers, I chose a secluded beach where I stretched out and rested my weary body in the bosom of the softest sand, close to the spray thrown up by the waves. The sun's chariot had by now bent its way past the last turning of the day, and I surrendered to the silence of the evening, and sweet sleep descended upon me. In the last chapter we have the metamorphosis and salvation of Lucius, and our doleful donkey on the beach says that a sudden fear aroused me about the first watch of the night. At that moment I beheld a full moon rising from the sea, with waves gleaming with special brightness. It seemed that fate had now had her fill of my grievous misfortunes, and was offering hopes of deliverance, however delayed. So I decided to address a prayer to the venerable image of the goddess appearing before my eyes. Our donkey prays, Queen of Heaven, with this feminine light of yours, you brighten every city and nourish the luxuriant seeds with your moist fire, bestowing your light intermittently according to the wandering truths of the sun. There's no ribald tales in this last chapter of the book, by the way. Let this be the full measure of my toils and hazards. Rid me of this grisly 4-footed form. Restore me to the sight of my kin. Make me again the Lucius that I was. But if I offended some deity who continues to oppress me with implacable savagery, at least allow me to die, since I cannot continue to live. This reference is no doubt to Homer's Odyssey, where the great god Poseidon prevents Odysseus from returning home from several decades of misadventures. And as you remember in the tale, the Cyclops that Odysseus' men blinds to escape his cave is a son of Poseidon. Our donkey remembers. These were the prayers which I poured out, supporting them with crowds of lamentation. But then sleep enveloped and empowered by wasting spirit as I lay upon that couch of sand. Scarcely had I closed my eyes, when suddenly from the midst of the sea, a divine figure arose, revealing features worthy of veneration even by the gods. And Lucius has an extended discussion of her majestic appearance. She answers, "Here I am, Lucius, roused by your prayers. I am the mother of the world and nature, mistress of all the elements, firstborn in this realm of time. I am the loftiest of deities, queen of departed spirits, foremost of heavenly dwellers, the single embodiment of all the gods and goddesses. And the whole world worships this single godhead under a variety of shapes and liturgies and titles." This recalls the Stoic philosophers who describe a Zeus who seems to be a monotheistic god. The technical term is henotheistic, where all gods are manifestations of the one true God. For Apuleius, this transcendent god is not the Stoic Greek god Zeus, but the Egyptian goddess Isis. Unlike Zeus, Isis can control the fates of men. And the goddess Isis responds, "I am here out of pity for your misfortunes. I am here to lend you kindly support. And now you're weeping, abandon your lamentation, set aside your grief, for through my providence your day of salvation is now dawning." And she instructs him to join the religious celebration in town the next day. Get close as if you intend to kiss the priest with a garland of roses, and then gently detach the roses. At once then shrug off the skin of this most hateful of animals, which has long been abominable in my sight. Do not be fearful, as I am also appearing to my priest as he sleeps, instructing him what to do. And the goddess Isis continues, "What you must carefully remember and keep ever locked deep in your heart is that the remaining course of your life until the moment of your last breath is pledged to me. For it is only right that all your future days be devoted to the one whose kindness has restored you to the company of men. Your future life will be blessed, and under my protection I will bring you fame and long life. But if you deserve to win my divine approval by diligent service, you will come to know that I alone can prolong your life, even here on earth, beyond the years appointed by your destiny." Now, when comparing the salvation story of Isis to the salvation story of Moses and the Jews, we notice one major difference. You sacrifice to the ancient gods to appease them so they can protect you from harm, and perhaps so they will bring you prosperity. But you also ask these boons of the God of Moses, but the Almighty God is more concerned with whether you love your neighbor as yourself, and whether you love God completely, whether you truly seek truth and virtue. We do not find any mention of Isis explicitly compelling Lucius to live a godly life. This is only implied. There is certainly no detailed instructions on how we should live a godly life like we find in the scriptures. The major difference between this description of the cult of Isis and Stoic philosophy is that the Stoics, who have greatly influenced Christianity, do not mention religious rites at all. All they care about is how to live a godly life, how you should love your neighbor, and how you should love God, whom they name either God or Zeus. Scholars suggest that this book may have been the most accurate and detailed description of the religious rites and festivals of the goddess Isis that has survived the ancient world. Now, the next day transpired as the goddess predicted in Lucius's dream. The priest was astonished how this task materialized. He abruptly stretched out his right hand unprompted and dangled the garland before my very face. My heart was beating wildly as I seized with greedy mouth the garland of beautiful roses. Immediately my animal form deserted me. First my unsightly bristles disappeared, and then my thick skin thinned out, and my fat belly shrunk. My hooves were transformed into toes and feet. My long neck shrank. My face and head became round. My donkey ears resumed their earlier modest shape, and my tail totally disappeared. Now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. All of the surviving manuscripts of the Golden Ass are derivative from one main manuscript, which is apparently substantially preserved. So this is yet another highly influential ancient work that almost perished. And the author Apuleius says that the Golden Ass was derived from a Greek manuscript with many Latin additions. We have excerpts from Lucian. He was likely the author. Also in our blog, we have several ribald stories that we did not include in this video, which were cut for length. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.